Imagine waking up to find strangers tearing up your backyard, all ordered by a smug HOA president who claims it's for the community. She thinks she's untouchable, but what she doesn't know is that her actions will unravel a scandal she never saw coming. Let's start from the beginning. It was one of those perfect Saturday mornings, the kind where the sun filters softly through the curtains and the only sound is the distant chirping of birds. Jack Simmons stretched in his bed, already picturing himself sipping coffee on his back porch, watching his kids chase each other around their well-kept backyard. His little slice of heaven, carefully cultivated over the years. But that peace was shattered by the grating sound of machinery roaring just outside his window. Jack bolted upright, his heart skipping a beat. He threw on his robe and rushed outside, his mind racing with questions. What he saw made him freeze mid-step. A team of workers in neon vests was unloading cement bags and assembling what looked like the base of a massive fountain. His fountain, on his lawn. And standing there, clipboard in hand, embarking orders like she owned the place, was none other than Helen Cartwright, the president of the HOA. "Excuse me, Helen?" Jack called out, his voice tight with confusion and rising anger. "What the hell is going on?" Helen turned to him, her expression so smug it could have been plastered on a billboard advertising arrogance. Her signature string of pearls gleamed in the sunlight as she gave him a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, Jack, good morning. Didn't you get the notice? We're installing a fountain here as part of the neighborhood beautification project. It's going to do wonders for property values." Jack's fists clenched at his sides. His backyard wasn't just a patch of grass. It was his family's retreat, a sacred space where his kids played and memories were made. "This is my property, Helen. You can't just barge in and start building." Helen tilted her head, feigning innocence. "Actually, we can. It's all in the updated HOA guidelines. You'd know if you bothered to attend our meetings." Jack felt his pulse quicken. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Guidelines? That doesn't override private property laws, but Helen didn't seem to care. She waved dismissively at the workers, signaling them to continue, before turning back to Jack with the kind of patronizing tone that made his blood boil. "Look, Jack, this is for everyone's benefit. Once it's done, you'll thank us. Just try to see the bigger picture." Jack stood rooted to the spot, watching in disbelief as the workers resumed construction. His sanctuary, his safe haven, was being ripped apart right in front of him. He stormed back into the house, heart pounding, and headed straight for the filing cabinet, where he kept every scrap of paperwork related to the HOA and his property. He flipped through the pages, looking for anything that could explain this outrageous violation. But as he scanned the documents, a sickening realization washed over him. He had never agreed to any updates or changes in the HOA bylaws. In fact, he deliberately avoided signing any recent proposals because he didn't trust Helen and her power-hungry antics. Jack sank into his chair, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. This wasn't just an oversight. This was an outright attack on his rights as a homeowner. And as much as he hated confrontation, Jack knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning of a battle he never wanted but couldn't afford to lose. Jack Simmons spent the next 7 days consumed by frustration and disbelief. His mornings began with stacks of paperwork spread out on the kitchen table, a steaming cup of coffee going cold as he pored over every line of his property deeds, HOA documents, and local zoning laws. His afternoons were spent confronting Helen, armed with evidence that clearly showed his backyard was private property, protected from any HOA interference. And yet, every interaction ended the same way, with Helen's smug, unshakable smile. "The HOA bylaws are clear, Jack," she would say, her voice dripping with false patience. "You're lucky we're improving your property for free. Most people would be grateful." Jack's blood boiled at her words. Grateful? She acted like she was doing him a favor by trampling his rights and turning his sanctuary into a construction zone. But the worst blow came on Wednesday afternoon, when Jack returned home from work to find that Helen had upped the ante. High atop a shiny, newly installed metal pole in his backyard was a surveillance camera, its lens pointed directly at his living room windows. Helen was there, of course, supervising the installation with her clipboard in hand. Jack stormed over, his voice sharp and unyielding. "Helen, what is that?" "Oh, the camera?" she replied with a casual wave, as if she had just installed a birdhouse. It's for security. We need to monitor the fountain construction site to prevent vandalism. You understand, right? No, I don't understand, Jack snapped. You've gone too far. This is an invasion of privacy. Helen's smile never wavered. Don't be so dramatic, Jack. It's for everyone's benefit. Jack's hands curled into fists at his sides, but he knew he had to keep his cool. Losing his temper wouldn't solve anything. Instead, he turned on his heel and went back inside, his mind racing. This wasn't just about the fountain anymore. It was about Helen's unchecked power and her blatant disregard for the law. Determined to find allies, Jack began reaching out to his neighbors. Many of them were sympathetic but hesitant to get involved. Helen's reputation as a bully was well known, and her position as HOA president gave her the leverage to impose fines or create trouble for anyone who crossed her. But not everyone was intimidated. Sarah, a young mother whose kids had been fined for playing with chalk on the sidewalk, and Tom, an elderly veteran who had been coerced into repainting his fence twice in 1 year, were just as fed up as Jack. Together, they formed an informal alliance, meeting in Jack's living room to brainstorm their next steps. It was Sarah who suggested installing cameras of their own. If she thinks she can watch us, we'll watch her right back, she said, her voice steady with resolve. Jack didn't waste any time. By the end of the week, he had installed discrete cameras around his property, capturing every movement of the workers, every inch of damage they caused, and, most importantly, every instance of Helen trespassing. The footage didn't take long to deliver results. One afternoon, Jack caught Helen in the act of ripping up the no trespassing signs he had placed along the property line. "You're going to regret this," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "I'll make sure your life is miserable." Jack met her glare with an icy calm. "We'll see who regrets it," he said, his tone as steady as his resolve. Jack Simmons knew he was out of his depth. Confronting Helen directly had done little more than embolden her, and the fines she started sending felt like personal jabs designed to crush his resolve. A $500 penalty for unkempt landscaping when his lawn was perfectly maintained, and a staggering $1,000 for violating some vague harmony standard. It was a blatant abuse of power. Jack was furious, but he was also determined. He needed backup. That's when he found Lisa Green, a sharp-witted attorney known for taking on property disputes. Her small, cozy office was a haven of organized chaos, stacks of legal files, a worn leather couch, and the faint aroma of fresh coffee in the air. Lisa listened intently as Jack laid out his case, her eyebrows rising higher with every detail. "She installed cameras on your property?" Lisa repeated, incredulous. Jack nodded. "And she's fining me for rules I never agreed to. It's like she's daring me to fight back." Lisa leaned back in her chair, her expression a mix of outrage and determination. "Jack, this isn't just a violation of property rights. It's an outright power grab. And from what you're describing, it sounds like there's more going on here than just a fountain. Let's dig deeper." Over the next few days, Lisa got to work, poring over financial records, HOA meeting minutes, and Jack's video footage. What she uncovered made Jack's stomach turn. Helen wasn't just overstepping her authority, she was running a racket. HOA funds meant for community upkeep were being funneled into private accounts. Helen had been using these funds to finance her so-called beautification projects, including the fountain in Jack's backyard. Even worse, Lisa discovered records of Helen claiming other homeowners' properties through shady bylaws and turning them into her personal profit machines. Jack could hardly believe it. "She's stealing from everyone," he muttered, staring at the damning evidence spread across Lisa's desk. Lisa nodded, her expression grim. "And it's been going on for years. She's counting on people being too scared or too tired to fight back. But with this," she gestured to the growing pile of evidence, "we can take her down." Encouraged by Lisa's confidence, Jack decided it was time to go public. He reached out to a local news outlet, sharing his story and the evidence Lisa had uncovered. The reporter who took the story was just as appalled as Lisa had been, and within days, a scathing expose hit the airwaves. The piece was damning. Helen was shown on camera trespassing in Jack's yard, ripping down his signs, and overseeing construction on private property. The reporter didn't hold back, detailing the financial discrepancies Lisa had uncovered and interviewing other residents who shared their own stories of Helen's bullying tactics. The impact was immediate. Neighbors who had once stayed silent out of fear began rallying around Jack. Sarah, Tom, and others who had suffered under Helen's rule finally felt empowered to speak up. Even those who had supported Helen started questioning her actions as the evidence piled up. For Jack, it was a bittersweet victory. The fight wasn't over yet. There were still legal battles ahead, but for the first time, he felt like he wasn't alone. The community was waking up, and Helen's iron grip was starting to loosen. The courtroom buzzed with a quiet intensity as Jack Simmons sat at the plaintiff's table, his hands clasped tightly together. On the other side of the room sat Helen Cartwright, her usual smug expression replaced by a strained mask of confidence. She had arrived with a small army of lawyers, but even they couldn't disguise the cracks beginning to show. This wasn't going to be another HOA meeting where she could wave off complaints and silence opposition. Here, under the weight of evidence Jack and Lisa had compiled, the truth would finally come out. The proceedings began, and Lisa presented the case with razor-sharp precision. First came the surveillance footage. The courtroom watched in silence as Helen was caught on camera trespassing in Jack's yard, tearing down his no trespassing signs, and giving orders to workers to continue construction despite Jack's protests. The video wasn't just damning, it was irrefutable. Next, Lisa revealed the financial records. Document after document painted a chilling picture of corruption. HOA funds earmarked for community projects had been siphoned into Helen's personal accounts. Invoices for beautification projects were shown to be grossly inflated, with the excess funds mysteriously disappearing. Helen's elaborate schemes were laid bare for everyone to see, and the air in the courtroom grew heavy with tension. Helen's lawyers tried to fight back, but their arguments crumbled under the sheer weight of evidence. When Helen was called to the stand, her usual composure wavered. She stumbled through her testimony, contradicting herself and failing to explain the suspicious transactions. Jack sat silently, his heart pounding as he watched Helen's confidence unravel. Every word, every piece of evidence, was a vindication of the weeks he had spent fighting back against her overreach. The judge, a stern and no-nonsense woman, finally addressed Helen directly. "Mrs. Cartwright," she said, her voice steady and firm, "you were entrusted with the responsibility to act in the best interest of this community. Instead, you abused your position for personal gain, violated property laws, and betrayed the trust of the very people you were meant to serve. This will not stand." The ruling was swift and decisive. Helen was ordered to remove the fountain and restore Jack's property at the HOA's expense. She was fined heavily for misappropriating funds and required to repay every dollar she had stolen from the HOA accounts. Furthermore, she was stripped of her position as HOA president, effective immediately. The courtroom erupted into whispers as the judge delivered her final remarks. Helen sat frozen, her face a mix of shock, fury, and humiliation. Jack couldn't help but notice how small she suddenly seemed, stripped of the power she had wielded so arrogantly. As the session adjourned, the assembled neighbors, many of whom had attended to show their support for Jack, burst into cheers. The sound echoed through the courtroom, a collective release of frustration and relief. Jack stood, a wave of emotion washing over him as people clapped him on the back and thanked him for standing up for their community. Helen, on the other hand, slinked out of the courtroom, her head down and her once proud demeanor shattered. She didn't even glance back as the applause followed Jack out the doors. The backyard looked just as it had before Helen's reign of chaos, a patch of green where Jack's kids could play freely, a space that once again belonged solely to the Simmons family. The fountain was gone, and the damage caused by weeks of unwanted construction had been repaired, all at the expense of the HOA. Jack watched from his porch as his children chased each other, their laughter floating through the air like a soothing melody. It was the first time in months he felt a genuine sense of peace. The neighborhood had changed, too. Helen's resignation marked the end of her oppressive rule, and with it came a wave of hope. The new HOA leadership, eager to repair the fractured trust of the community, immediately began implementing reforms. Transparency became their mantra, starting with a full audit of past projects to ensure no other skeletons were hiding in the association's closet. For the first time in years, homeowners were invited to participate in open discussions, their voices finally being heard. Jack's victory had sent ripples through the neighborhood. People who had once avoided him out of fear of retaliation now came to his door, not with complaints, but with gratitude. Tom, the elderly veteran, shook Jack's hand firmly. "You didn't just fight for yourself, Jack. You fought for all of us. Thank you." Sarah, the young mother, stopped by with a plate of cookies and a heartfelt smile. "You showed us that we don't have to be afraid. You've given us hope." At first, Jack had been reluctant to accept their praise. He hadn't set out to be a hero. He had only wanted to protect his family's sanctuary. But as he saw the change unfolding in the neighborhood, he realized his fight had become something much bigger. Sitting on his porch, Jack took a deep breath, savoring the crisp air of a sunny afternoon. The memories of the exhausting legal battle, the sleepless nights, and the constant anxiety felt distant now, like a bad dream finally fading away. He glanced at his kids, their giggles blending with the sound of rustling leaves. This was what he had fought for, the simple joy of a home, untainted by fear or intrusion. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Jack's wife joined him, handing him a cup of tea. "It feels good, doesn't it?" she said, her voice warm with pride. Jack nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "It does. It's not just about the yard. It's about knowing that no one can take what's ours, not without a fight." The sense of triumph wasn't just personal. It was a message to everyone. No one is above the law. Jack's determination had shown his neighbors, and perhaps even a wider audience, that standing up to injustice, no matter how daunting, was always worth it.